The Western sexual market is broken and distorted. It no longer serves the needs of families, men, women, and children, and society in general. The results are high divorce rates, children raised without stable families, unhappiness, heartbreak, and worse. Today I have a special guest, Curt Doolittle, and we'll discuss how we must fix the sexual marketplace. Whoop. Welcome, Curt.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
I'm a fan. Most people probably know I'm a fan, but I'm a fan. I always figure that there's a huge industry built up on fixing people who are broken in psychology, and there's an industry of guys like you who are trying to prevent it from getting there, and that isn't a recognized industry. And I actually wish it would be, because our education and our parental system is no longer providing that service. So I'm a big fan. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a big part of the reason that not just our sexual marketplace, but the entire social marketplace. People talk about the economy booming, but in a booming economy, when no one has friends and we're all atomized and no one knows how to cooperate with their neighbors, that's not a stable society. And eventually, economic things will suffer from this atomization and lack of ability for people to be in hierarchies that they enjoy and that they receive benefits from.
Well, yeah, and that men are committing suicide and women are drugging themselves. So I mean, what is it? It's something like, it varies a lot depending on what we're measuring, but somewhere between a third and 40% of women are on drugs, and they're easier to women are easier to solve than the men problem, because while women might act out, men act. And so you end up with women crazy and on drugs, and men committing suicide or just giving up on society. And so I agree, but again, this is I actually view this as a fairly simple. I view it as a fairly simple problem that's very difficult to politically fix. But anyway, so how do we want to start this today?
Well, I think it would be good to talk about what some of the distortions in the sexual marketplace are. Things like, for example, welfare, reducing the economic value that men can provide to women, their special uniqueness.
Well, like evolution, just like Darwin said, evolution doesn't have a direction. I try not to get in the position of saying human relations have a direction, because the direction of human relations is to have serial monogamous relationships for a very small number of monogamous relationships for the elites, serial monogamous relationships for the majority, and just random affections for the underclass. And so that's the normal direction of any polity that lacks that can afford that level of chaos. It was actually the evolution of what we call property, but basically possessions, or better in the traditional term, capital. Was the evolution of capital, like land, farm instruments, cattle, sheep, that gave rise to the family as we know it, because capital is such a multiplier of returns. So we kept those things in the family, and that's why primitive cultures have very extended families, and very wealthy cultures like Northern Europeans, because we were the first to really pull it all together. Northern Europeans have what turns out to be not a very good idea, which is what do you call it? Absolute nuclear families. And so the absolute nuclear family worked very well when, the Revoys and the Siroys, your ancestors and mine, were in the same town. And when my kids, I'm a little bit older than you, so I sent my oldest to you to help raise your kids and take care of your farm. And then you sent one of your youngers to me when I got older and needed help around the house. And we did that because we were all basically third cousins. So when you have a fairly high quality manorial society that controls access to land and limits it to people of good character, i.e., men and women who are married, who demonstrate their creditworthiness, which at that point was access to land, you got a fairly good genetic result of it. And so the reason I say that little bit of history is to understand that what we have traditionally built as the traditional absolute nuclear family is a model that was produced in a period of time, was very eugenic, probably was one of the most significant influences on our construction of our society. But outside of that model of a homogeneous extended family, it's actually quite fragile. Because in that sense, I was insuring your family and you were insuring mine with these children and work, whereas in the traditional family, in other words, there's absolute nuclear. There's a couple of variations of the traditional family, and it really depends on inheritance structure. Some inheritance structures are to one child, some are to all the children, and some, this depends on how it goes. So equalitarian or hierarchical. And in those families, you're basically reflecting how much insurance the family has to supply or how much society has to supply. So what's happened is, am I creating a...
No, it's good. I like the depth.
Okay, so I tend to create long chains of argument to help people understand the broad patterns of civilization. But so what's happened is now we've gone to the point where we're wealthy enough that we've passed the nuclear family, in the essence meaning that individuals are now able to pay for their own reproduction. Now, there's the problem is that just as the old traditional family provides better psychological comforts, in other words, the insurance is more rewarding, and just as the nuclear family and absolute nuclear family provided social reinsurance, what's happened is we've moved beyond the relationship, which is an empirical test of worthiness, into political insurance. And now there's no relationship. There's no relationship between one's actions and the insurance provided by others. Does this make sense?
Yeah. Instead of earning reciprocal relationships, people have chosen to basically use parasitical relationships through the government to manage their reproduction.
Because they can, and you can't say, well, you're a shitty kid, I'm sorry, you're mine, but you're on your own until you learn, right? And so as in any economic arena or any set of relations, when you subsidize something, no matter how good your intentions, you'll get more of it. When you have a child who's a drug user, if you subsidize that out of care, you will get more drug use. If you have sexual promiscuity or children out of marriage and you subsidize it, you will get more of it. So what's happened is really we've broken the empirical relationship between people's behavior and the insurance provided by the social group. And And unfortunately, while in the short term that feels rewarding, right? In the long term, it has produced the end of us actually insuring each other in any way at all. Yeah. And so we have gone from a familial society, which basically means a social order, to an industrial or market order, and that's broken those bonds of insurance and put them in an abstract third party, and that's why people are increasingly, especially the new generation, lonely, disorganized, alienated, frustrated, and increasingly politicized as a means to appeal or try to alleviate the pain.
Yeah, we keep moving the from survival in the jungle, where it's all up to you as the individual, to the tribe, now it's, to the village, to the extended family, and now it's moved up to all failure has been pushed up a level, gets pushed up to the level of the nation. And now they're even trying to...
You see a Detroit just go, a Baltimore just go. New York is going to take a long time to go because of all the money, but New York is going. Any economist can look at that and say, well, it's Rome. There's a few thousand families that feed all of New York City's entire tax structure, and that's only possible because the federal government redistributes the entire wealth of the American continent through New York City's distribution system. So New York is going. I'm visiting. My family's from Connecticut, and Connecticut was second only to California in progressive imitation of the Soviet policies. And Connecticut's, trying not to go bankrupt, and they won't have the honest discussion that there's basically three costs. There's old age care, right, and etc. There is public sector pensions and the private sector, and the first two can't survive on the productivity of the third. And you got Yale, Trinity, and Wesleyan here, three of the most secular theocratic institutions in America in this one state, and they basically destroyed what was probably the best place to live other than this Loire Valley in human history.
Well, and we can't even blame it on minorities since it's still a mostly white state. It's the policies. They don't work no matter what you look like.
Yep.
It's the idea of continuing to push risks up to another level. That doesn't strike me as an idea that would occur in general to men. This seems more like an idea that would occur more to women as being a promoter of the idea of pushing the risk up to a bigger and bigger entity.
Well, that's what women do, right? They create demands, and men absorb cellular damage on behalf of women and children, and that's actually our biological role. It's why there are more of us born, slightly more of us born. It's why we die earlier. It's why when women fill the workforce, they take the easy and comfortable jobs, and men are pushed into the high risk jobs at either end of the spectrum, so that women now occupy all the professions that are dependent mostly on customer service relationships, and men occupy the positions that are mostly dependent on risk and cellular damage accumulation.
Yeah. Now it's interesting that we see this as the problem at a big level. How would we what would we have to do to the sexual market to fix this problem?
Well, to some degree, if you say I want to go back to the family, you have to do it the way the Muslims do, which is by force. Because under wealth, we all choose. This is what the communists didn't expect. Under wealth, they thought we would all come together into a harmonious polity. What happens actually is the wealthier we get, the more we pursue our random self-interest, because we can. The more subsidy we have for pursuit of our random self-interest at the expense of intertemporal, the long term, then the more we do. We subsidize something, we get more of it. So there's a question now of what is artificial and what is possible. You can devolve civilization, in other words, our standard of living, to Islamic levels or African levels and restore that dependency. You put it into Islamic levels, you're going to get, or Arab levels, you're going to get the familialism. If you restore it to Italian levels, you're going to get, or to Italian and French levels, you're going to get that, as long as you don't prohibit immigration, you probably can get away with that. If you restore it to African levels, you're going to restore male dominance. So, we tend to think of these as choices, but they're actually they're actually, we call it economies, but they're sets of relations that that make choices, and some of our choices can be family security at the excuse of less income, or tribal security at much less income, and we can send men back to preying upon the neighbor family and lying as heroic as they do in the lower societies. We can continue on our direction, which is to suppress parasitism in all its forms. But it turns out that this tends to benefit women if they at the expense of men. In other words, there's a point at which we lose the equilibrium, and it's in one or the other's choices to rebel. And so my argument would be that convoluted way of getting to making sure I've eliminated the boundaries of the discussion so that it doesn't go sideways. To answer your question directly, it's to stop subsidizing malincentives.
Yeah.
And of course, men are quite cheap, really. It doesn't cost much to keep a man, and there's no need for us to pay cellular damage. So, as you said, elsewhere, men can go their own way at the cost of genetic loss. Right? They can lose families, and that's what happened in a lot of history. Is a lot of men didn't have children. I mean, somewhere between 30 and 70% of men didn't have children. What monogamy did is it created a peace, right, between men. It created social stability so that you didn't have loose men running around preying on everybody because they didn't have sexual sedation, so to speak.
Well, and there wasn't sufficient. What I like to say is there wasn't sufficient incentive to create a harem and kill off all your rivals.
Right, and so I think, the normal person is not able to think outside the normative box, right? Well, if we change one variable, everything will stay the same. The truth is, if we change one variable, the countervening variables change. And so what's happened today is, as always happens when there's a large number of unhappy men, you get a revolution. And so this revolution has been caused by the use of credit, money, and immigration. If it wasn't for immigration, you wouldn't have the cheap labor functions. Our prices would be higher, but more men would be able to, and women would be able to form families and raise children in two-parent households instead of having a lot of one-parent households that are all poorer, which is what's happened, right? So this attempt to make life easier has not made life easier. It's made life harder. And so my view is that my understanding is that if you want to go through it in order, we should go back to educating men and women separately, because women learn by obedience and men learn by competition. And if boys don't learn that competition, they actually have nothing to care about. And so it's developmentally damaging for boys to sit and gossip all day, which is what a classroom is today. And it's developmentally helpful for girls. We're seeing that in the data. It's not that female capital is being let loose. It's that failed male capital is being destroyed by our education system. So that's one place. The second is in the workplace. Education lasts far too long, contrary to, and there's really not much evidence that after about 7th or 8th grade we're doing any good at all. That could change by limiting education to part of the day. Upping physical activity quite a bit, and limiting education to part of the day, and then using the German method of working with industry to get people into the workforce in different classes very early on, so that you didn't have this artificially extended childhood. I mean, childhood doesn't exist until we put women into the workforce, and we made up childhood in order to excuse the taxes that were, make an excuse for the loss of parenting and the loss of intergenerational transfer of habits, norms, and morals, in order so we could consume all the money created by women by taxation. we put all these women in the workforce. We just took all their money to taxes to redistribute to people who have children that they shouldn't be having. And so we actually used this process of taxation, easy taxation and income taxation to destroy 3,500 years of eugenic progress. And that's why we're sort of gone down to what we call 100 today, but we're rapidly heading toward 97, and below 97 on an average IQ basis. It's not a gradual decline. It's a rather cliff effect. You have a rather geometric drop in standard of living because of it.
Well, and the big problem is you can afford to have some lower IQ people, as long as you're not allowing them to reproduce at enormous rates. They can survive on the work of the higher IQ people, but if you've ever been in a canoe, it tips fine until you get to a certain point, and then all of a sudden you're in the water. There's a tip point, and beyond that, you're in the water. And we're in Western society, we're tipping towards that point where the wealthy and the middle class simply cannot subsidize the lower class and the parasitic class anymore. We're out of money.
And we've imported 57, 70 or 80 million of the lower class, and there's only 200 and some odd million of us. And so that's the real issue, is that it was one thing when you're importing those people as under agrarianism and they're put into the workforce. It's another when you import some of them under industrialism. But what's happening is we're eliminating the value of those jobs and increasing the number, therefore increasing demand for redistribution and subsidy to pay for them, and therefore increasing demand for the state to force that redistribution.
And we're doing it just as these lower skilled jobs, the demand for them is dropping due to automation. So just as the demand for them drops, we're bringing them in.
So this is the problem in economics: is you see the typical mainstream. Now they won't like this, but I'll cast mainstream economics as leftist. They don't believe that, but it has to be true. It's not a matter of choice. And so the mainstream economist first says. Hope I don't lose my train of thought. First says, well, we're getting so much benefit now that it covers the costs later. That's not true. Kicking the can down only exacerbates the correction. And that's what 2008 was taught us.
2008 tried to correct things with a financial model. That kind of failed. That basically failed.
Well, there's nowhere. Yeah, I'm going to lose my train of thought. But yeah.
Sorry.
And so what's happening now is that they are trying. Europe is in the position. So is America. Is that they've made all these unsustainable promises to folk in terms of redistribution and retirement, and we've not only largely reaped the benefits of the low-hanging fruit of industrialization. We're in a position, as you said, where it's becoming hard to employ people. And so, whereas the Western economist says, wow, we got to have immigrants to solve this problem of paying the retirements of these people. Of course, you and I see that as just genocide, correctly. And what the Japanese and Chinese have done is say, we're going to pay the cost of using automation to solve the problem of labor shortage, right? Of underclass labor shortage, and we're going to have to keep people employed longer in life, but in easier jobs, in order to compensate for it. And we're not going to lose our civilization, our culture, our gene pool to do it. So it's actually the East Asians that are doing the right thing, and we're doing the wrong thing. And thankfully, somewhere around 92 to 2000, the rest of the world stopped listening to us. Unfortunately, you have China that has a vast reserve of average 105 IQ. Let's not get too exaggerated. Somewhere above us, let's just say it's 105 IQ people that don't seem to pay the rural IQ tax that we do. In other words, Western people get quite a bit get quite a bit of a boost in demonstrated IQ when they move to cities, but rural people in East Asia don't seem to have that problem. They don't need to be in a city to maintain their ability to be trained in skills. So you can't go so if they have the Red Army, which is they have a monolithic bureaucracy, they have a huge pool of capital, and that capital is fairly good human capital. You have a very different circumstance with India, which is 30% Indo-European and 70% Dravidian, so in some mixture. It's either 70-30 or 30-70. And they can't get out of the hole. And South America is in the same position. And I have this incredible empathy for South American intellectuals because they're basically screwed. Is that they're European in culture, but you can't sustain that European culture and civilization with that distribution. It's just not possible. I mean, just like in Africa, rural people do fine. In South America, rural people do fine. But when you try to disrupt those orders and you try to make large urban societies, you just get favelas alongside a middle-class society. You can't do anything about it. Well, we're trying to do the same thing in America today, is that we've turned our cities into plantations. And so we're instead of seeing a civilizational collapse with a monolithic culture like, say, Russia or the Roman Empire, or even parts of the Chinese history, you're seeing a city-by-city collapse of our civilization. And as you get flight from these places to suburbs, and then the cities collapse, and then the people move, like what they're doing in the Americas, they move south.
Well, so there'll be a dozen Romes in America. What it'll be it'll be a dozen Romes in America. Rome went from a couple million, I think, population down to tens of thousands overnight.
Yeah. Well, it went pretty fast, right?
Yeah.
Well, Detroit is a great example. Baltimore is going. I said New York is going. Los Angeles is gone. Los Angeles has it's an incredibly large city. People forget that. Like Tokyo is huge, right? It goes on forever. Moscow's the same way. Los Angeles is the same way. The difference is Los Angeles is a slum except for this little downtown core. It's just a huge slum. So Los Angeles is probably gone, so we can lose this, or we can correct it. Now, the question everybody has is it correctable? I mean, you threw the Muslims out of Spain. You threw the Turks out of Europe. We can throw people out of anywhere. It's just a matter of willpower. And the problem is, are 1% of men willing to do that? And if 1% of men are willing to do that, and I think they are, and I think I know how to help them do that, help them
figure out a path.
Make the decision, then it can be changed. The other alternative is just to separate. Now, we're already engaged in the big sort. Everybody I know is heading to the Carolinas for some reason. I don't know why that is, but maybe the weather. What?
It's hot there.
Yeah. You see people relocating, but again, that's what we've done throughout history, is the smart people leave the stupid people behind, and that's how we covered the world, right? We covered the world. The problem is there aren't any continents left, so we're going to either fight for this one or we're going to lose it.
Yeah, there's nowhere left to run. And the other thing is people are justifiably concerned about what is essentially open borders along the U.S. southern border. Worse is there's open borders everywhere in the U.S. You have a plague of Californians moving to Colorado. I have friends in Colorado complaining that it's turning into California 2.0. And the moment that they sink that, they'll be over in Texas.
Yes, and so the plague, the human conceptual plague that was invented in California they spread it. They turn it. They're cockroaches, right? Or not? Yeah, that's not.
They're NPCs.
What?
They're NPCs.
They're NPCs, but they're basically locusts, right?
Yeah.
They culturally destroy some area, then they move on and culturally destroy another one. I know where this strategy came from, but I'm not going to say it on here. But that strategy was developed by design. Anyway, so you asked me to go through this what can be done. I started with education. I started with education into the workforce. The next would be education into the skill sets, which we call the university, and that's really there's no reason to pay for a degree that isn't STEM-L. You know, if it doesn't require calculation, it doesn't require a college education. If it's just a form of entertainment, which is literature, or history or whatever. If it doesn't require science, then it's not, or it's really a form of calculation. If it doesn't require a form of calculation, all these pseudosciences need to come off the books. I mean, there's stuff out there that's in college. We're giving people 4-year degrees and charging them a phenomenal amount of money for what's really a 6-month jobs training program, and they run out of this thing with debt. Well,
I know people that took a 5-year degree to be a video filmographer. They haven't produced anything at the end of that. My son, he says, I want a YouTube channel. He grabs a phone and a little stabilizer, and he's running around the house making videos and figuring out what his script will be and what story he's trying to tell. He's going to be far ahead of that kid in 5 years, and it cost him nothing, and he's 5.
Well, it's also a false promise. So I have a pretty long list of prescriptions for modifying education, but in the university, it's just stop subsidizing malincentives. The other thing is that ensure that a university is one of those places that can preach destruction, like the church, like a religion, but it doesn't have to warranty its words. So if you made it so that there were no such thing as student loans, that the university had to carry those loans, and that they had to be paid off in 10 years out of exit, you'd have a very different university program. And so my world is stop subsidizing, as always. I'll give this answer to everything. Stop sizing malincentives. And universities are designed largely to take care of stupid people that shouldn't go to college, women who want to learn how to mother as a profession, like social work or psychology, and let's just leave it to leave college to be what it is, which is for the 10% of people who can calculate, which is people over 115 IQ, for the 10% of people who can calculate, to learn how to calculate using increasingly complex means. I mean, that's all you learn in college, right? I mean, it's rhetoric in high school, it's logic in upper half of grade school, and it's grammar, which is repetition, in the first few years. That's what grammar, logic, rhetoric, calculation, and job skills mean. Now, if your job skill is going to require calculation, you need the university. If your job skill requires learning how to work at the dentist's office, it's just a job skill. And so why are we charging people 4-year degrees and $100,000 worth of debt? Because you got to do the math. It costs, no matter what you do, at least $15,000 a year to pay to pay for the education itself. Then you've got room and board. That's another 10 to 15, right? And the rest is just offset by the endowments and gifts.
And lost opportunity costs. You go to school for 5 years, you forgo 5 years of income. Right.
And if you're not working, I mean, I started working at 9. My mother doesn't believe it because she doesn't remember it. But I started working holidays for my father at 9. By the time I was in 6th grade, I was working evenings after school cleaning up the lawn and garden center. On holidays, I worked every holiday. Stupid stuff, but it would be like filling the van with all the orders that had to be delivered, right? And by the time, people say, well, how come you did well in business? But because I knew how to run a business by the time I was 14. You know everything about it. It's not complicated. Be nice to people because a customer is the hardest thing to get. And take good care of them and don't have too much inventory and don't spend money you don't have to. I mean, it's not complicated.
No, it's amazing that when you meet men like you or like me, we almost all started working before we were 10. I started at 4, going with my father to his industrial cleaning jobs, and I would clean the stuff that was safe, and he'd clean all the dangerous industrial stuff. And then I construction company, same thing. And you get to see, by the time I was 10, I could estimate the size of a house and exactly how much it cost to renovate it.
Yes.
Just as well as an adult could.
Yeah.
Just from going for a few years.
Who says that? The guy who I love him because he criticizes education, but he doesn't answer. What?
You thinking of Mike Rowe?
No. He's older.
Okay.
Anyway,
John Gatto?
Gatto. And so he doesn't have any answers, but he gives the great criticism, and he says, well, there were kids that were piloting ships around the world at the age of 12. I mean, and this is my view of it, is that this is actually the core problem, is that we have listened to women and listened to the government of women, and we have extended childhood because the woman has a need for control, and she has a need for control of her children. And the survey data is really obvious. Women prefer children they can control over children that can succeed.
Oh, I'd be so sad if I could control my son.
Yeah. And men, we don't think like that. We're like, get out of my control, right? Because you're work for me. But women don't think like that, and so they didn't evolve to do that. So we've feminized society so much that we've infantilized people, so that guys like us, there's no reason. My grandmother was knitting and selling mittens at 5. There's no reason we're extending this childhood into 40.
Well, the thing is, when a woman has many children, she's having, say, a child every 3 years for 10 years, okay? Or not for more than that, for 10 children, like they used to have. What ends up happening is, for the vast majority of her life, she's always got a baby around. So she can control the baby. She doesn't feel the need to baby the 5-year-old because she's got to baby the 3-year-old and the 1-year-old that was just born.
Yeah.
And
I say it a different way, which is that women evolved to carry a cognitive load. Right, and we are, and if you and men evolved to carry a cognitive load, and if you compare that with the data that says people are happiest at the maximum load they can perform without failure, and so when you take what happens is we put our energies into things that are destructive if we don't put our energies into things that are constructive. And one of my favorite quotes from history is. Idle hands make ill will, or Alexander Pope's improvement on it, which is when to mischief mortals bend their will, how soon they find instruments of ill. So we develop our cognitive load, yet we're extending childhood. And so let's move back childhood so that people are carrying the cognitive, emotional, and social load. All we do is make people crazy. That's really what we're doing, is we're making an insane, infantilized series of generations that's gotten worse ever since really the socialist attempt to gain power. It's really just the feminist socialist attempt to gain power, put people in infantilized circumstances so they can control them and go forward. Do they understand what they're doing? No, they don't have the agency to understand it. Guys like us, we spend our whole lives trying to develop enough agency to understand what we and others are doing. It takes me my whole life, my life's work to understand that. But we have very little agency. So, it's like you don't. The dog likes to drag its rear end on the rug, right? Well, you have to teach the dog not to. Well, humans are the same thing. We don't have agency. We don't know better. We just work on intuition. Reason's expensive, and it's really fragile. So,
the more that you exercise your agency, of course, it gets stronger. But it's like your body. There is a limit to how much work you can do with your agency in a given period of time. And when we used to have a very structured society, there was a lot of things now that we're having to think deeply about. If you're a young man and a young woman, for example, and you want to get married, it used to be that your father and mother in your community would filter the potential men you had. You didn't have to, you liked one of the men your dad also said was okay, then marry him because he was probably a good bet. Nowadays it's you have to put a lot of work into figuring out who you're going to marry because you don't have any structure to help you with that.
And you lack the skills.
Yes,
because
no one told you.
Been socialized. You haven't been socialized in the workplace. You haven't been socialized with other genders outside of the school system, which is essentially prison. And so you've been malinformed. I love Eastern Europe because they don't put up with any of this stuff. So again, I want to make sure I complete my series. So we got into university, right? So limit immigration, reform education to push, restore adulthood, and reverse feminine infantilization. And then the next thing is just stop subsidizing malincentives. Of course, my argument is you can't have a child unless you can afford one, right? I mean, that's really the issue. Why do women have the right to bear children they can't afford? And then push the cost of them on the tribe, which is what they evolved to do. But that's why marriage came about, is to control the ability of women to force. Now, to satisfy men's sexuality is one thing, but the value of marriage was to limit women's ability to push the costs of their frivolity or their impulses out on the rest of the tribe, and therefore keep you at Darwinian levels of poverty. Whereas the minute you've got the tribe as a man and a woman, it's calculable. In other words, your actions are now calculable. And again, women resist this at all costs. They resist this at every
resist
opportunity.
Limits, say.
What?
They resist limits.
I mean, the nesting urge does not end. You can never give a woman enough, or you can never make her go backwards. And if you understand that as a man, your whole job is to constrain the nesting urge to within spending, and without having her defect to someone who increases her ability to nest and preen, right? And so what you get is women who know that, and women who don't, and women who don't, we respect it, and women who don't, and then you get the behavior. The same thing for men is the difference is men will fool around, but they won't leave their marriage, which is what happens in most of the world. The difference is because for men, sex is a need, and for women, sex is a want. And nature made us that way, and there's really, until we find some drug to fix it, it's not going to change. So subsidizing it, and this really goes stop subsidizing single parenthood, and then end this alimony child support thing. This is really how what the alimony child support, no fault divorce, that was the real big one. People say it's the pill. I disagree. The evidence is that it's no fault divorce. One of the things that it still exists in some states is that if I break up your marriage, you can sue me for damages. That needs to come back.
Yep.
If we put those two things back, we're going to have we'll have people work harder at preserving the marriage and work less hard at defecting, because single family child. I mean, you put one income and one family together, that's fine. But you have to have two people working and tax the entire woman's productivity. You still have to pay for child rearing and all the education time and whatever, and that's what's causing the issue. And then the next is I'm trying to think, do I need to go down this rat hole? No, I'm not going to go down that rat hole. So anyway, so just alimony and child support, I can't tell you how much I have learned about how incentivized, I mean, our divorce destroyed $100 million business because it removed it split my power over the shares,
the massive blow that would give it to you, the massive personal blow. It's very hard to run a business at a high level if you don't have a good woman behind you. That's if you're not in a strong marriage, it's very hard for you then to direct your energies outside to accomplishing things like, making your business successful or
my wife was utterly amazing, right? I mean, together we were a power couple because she would go out and farm relationships, It would work like a funnel, and it was just an amazing thing. But the court system doesn't measure anything except measurable capital. It doesn't measure consequences. And so for me, it was incredibly destructive. And then, of course, they set, I'm basically retired, and you get the child support issue out of that. And it's like, look, I can't do that, and I won't. And so you look at other guys, and I'm like, the other guys aren't me. I can go out and be fine no matter what. But you take the average guy who's a craftsman, right? And you put him on child support obligations. So now, keeping this household and his own, and he's got to find value with another woman. He's now lost his sexual market value. So my view is that the only way to keep men from revolting, overthrowing it, and turning it back into the Dark Ages, which is in their interest, why not, is to just make it, restore reciprocity. Look at marriages. There's no if a women own their children, fine. If you leave, you can have your children, but men keep their wealth, and that's it. There's nothing going on. It's just if it's just a trivial relationship, it's just a trivial relationship, and bear your own costs. If you don't want to bear the cost of your children, then have your husband take them.
Negotiate something. Yes. Negotiate a
but
solution.
But now it's so hostile to men. I mean, my favorite example is at one point we had discovered mold in our house. It's Pacific Northwest, so it's like you've got to guard against it all the time. And I have pretty bad asthma. It was getting worse, and so I said, something's not right here. So, and she said, well, we could just fix this. I said, you don't understand. We can't paint over it. The best thing we can do is burn the house down, right? It ended up not taking that. We had to replace whole sections of wall, right, down to the studs, and including the studs in some places, and so what does that do? End up in court. It ends up in the court documents as Curt threatened to burn the house down. Anybody who knows it.
Well, and the courts,
that wouldn't even enter my mind.
and the courts are extremely obsessively against any display of masculinity within the marriage. You display any masculine tendencies, you get angry, and that can be turned against you, even if the anger is completely justified and is a natural reaction to a situation.
Women can get angry, yet they can.
Yeah.
Women can get angry and upset in court, and it's not held against them. So,
because women aren't considered, the court does not consider women to have the same agency as men.
That's right. Well, they don't, but that's the problem.
Yes.
That doesn't mean we should be brutalized for our presence of agency and then forgiven. It's one thing to recognize the lack of agency. It's another to satisfy it. Soft subsidies. Education system subsidies, and then you have to end the nonsense in the workplace of involuntary association, forced association. Realistically, I've built, most people know this, I've built a whole lot of companies, and I've built little ones and big ones, and mostly in technology or technology-related law-related technology, I'm sorry, but it's just guys are just better. I mean, it's true. Women in relationship management, I made a lot of money hiring smart, attractive women as project managers instead of men, right? But, working with men on your management team, there's just so much less drama. And then you get these feminists in my generation who think it's because they're women. No, it's because you're a fucking asshole in a board meeting. Who cares about whether someone likes it or not? We're doing empirical management here. It's just math.
Well, and there are men who are like that too, but you can tell them they're an asshole and fire them, and they'll cry about it.
Yes. Yep. So the other thing, the rise of HR departments as feminist police. So this is what I want to get rid of, is that let's just go, because they think it's just this equal choice, and it isn't. Our choice as men is to go impose the caliphate on women if we want to. I mean, there's nothing they can do about it if we get. It takes 1% of us to do that, not even. And so, I mean, we can do that if we want to. So my point is, it's not an ideal, it's a trade. I mean, it's a compromise. And so we until men can put a what do you call it, a artificial uterus.
Womb in a bottle.
Unless you can, until we can buy our, buy some genes and clone our own tribes, at which point every man will have 10 sons, right? Because there's nothing. Guys who have sons understand this, and guys who don't. If you have sons, you're like God, right? You could do anything because you have your own tribe, right? And they take care of each other, and they take care of you, and it's wonderful. The minute a man can get 5 sons, every guy's going to have them. And nobody's going to let us have daughters because, you don't trust men with that stuff. But you sons, you're going to have a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, but why would you have daughters if you can have sons? So
exactly. So sons are wonderful. So until that happens, we sort of have to make this compromise. In any event, so there's this spectrum of malincentives, and you'll notice under none of them did I said women have to do such. I didn't say that at all. I didn't say you have to think differently. I said we as men are going to stop subsidizing these behaviors that were generally contained by tribal, marital, agrarian, and industrial and legal life. And we have let this Pandora out of the box, and we've seen what happens is that we revert to premarital states. In other words, we revert to primitivism, which is just women doing whatever they want and forcing men to bear the costs in both lifespan, cellular damage, emotional damage, and loss of affection, loss of life experiences, and financial poverty. I mean, if you're a guy right now, and guys in my generation, they're looking at retiring in poverty because of what they've done here.
Yeah, your generation, they pulled the rug out from underneath of you and didn't even tell you in time what was going on. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, young men, they have this massive advantage. They have the internet. They can go look at red-pilled information. They can figure out the real truth about how women react, and they can figure out what to do in order to prevent themselves from getting in those kind of situations, or at least to give them the highest chance of that. They can get coaches and stuff like that. None of that existed 10 years ago, 15 years ago even.
Yep.
Let alone
So I want to conclude with a summary of what I just said, okay? I didn't plan this out. We're just talking, right? It's just coming to me as we're talking. Is that most men want to say, what can I do on my own? And this is what's wrong. Is that we are packs, right? Packs have to work together to form armies. Each pack is basically a division. You form an army. You can't do much on your own. You can only do much with other men. And what you can do right now is to insure yourself against the ability to be extracted from, right? Which basically means, what I tell men is you get an overseas bank account, you make sure it has your run money in it. The second thing you can do is just make sure that you know a woman well enough before you get in a relationship with her, and you go through 2 to 4 years before you give her kids. Because in that 2 years of relationships and 2 to 4 years of living together, you're going to see through her act, right? You're going to know the real person. And the last is don't go into debt, right? Don't go into debt until you've gone through 2 years of relationship, 2 to 4 years of marriage, and you've had your time together. Because remember, you didn't have an adult, you were made an infant, so now you got to have your teenage years, and now you have your teenage years with your new wife, and then you have your children and whatever. If you're lucky enough to find a girl that's religion provides mindfulness to women, and so they're less controllable by the impulse of the feminine herd's constant need for status signaling. The continuous status signaling that women evolve is a daily competition we call fashion, is just virtue signaling.
And I think too, with religion, or even with the belonging to a very tight-knit community that they identify with, is that the communities in general, very rare you'll find a tight-knit community that's anti-marriage. Most tight-knit communities will punish their members for unnecessary divorce, either by ostracism or simply by lowering
I want to
their...
interject something. I'm not sure that marriage as we know it is going to be a thing. What I do know, I mean, it's probably going to, because we can afford it, it's probably going to turn into wealthy people have persistent marriages because there's nothing else in their interest. Middle class, upper middle class, and middle class people have 7 to 20-year marriages, and the underclass go back to serial marriages. The underclasses stay as basically temporary affections. And I think that the point here is not to seek monogamy, it's to seek choice for men without being anchored by the state and women. In other words, you can't control that woman anymore, right? Neither economically, politically, or anything legally. So since she's no longer economically dependent upon you, you can't control her. So the issue isn't to seek the perfect monogamous marriage. The issue is to seek a separation of assets. So in the case so that there's no way if she decides or you decide for whatever reasons to break it, that you're still you still are able to join the market for affection, reciprocity, and care.
Well, and that's the basics of negotiation. In negotiation, you always got to have your what-if scenario. Yep. And simply having a what-if scenario increases the chance of the negotiation being successful. Yep. If women understand that they can't get their way using the divorce, they're more likely to try to negotiate within the marriage to improve things rather than throwing the marriage away and trying something else.
Right. Because men sleep around for interest. Women sleep around to determine if they can trade up. And so women, this is just what it is, right? I mean, I don't have to get into that. And you can't argue with women about it because they don't have the agency to recognize their own intuitions. At least I don't want to. I'd say, well, we're not all women. I'm like, that's an Axel statement. For a man, we just say women. What we mean is a distribution. When women hear women, they hear an equality.
Well, what happens too is the women that you and I will be around are high enough. We just won't tolerate really low agency women in our presence.
That's right.
And so we end up being around these amazing women all the time.
Yes,
and so really, for us, it's hard to realize how low agency most women are because we just don't see them. They can't be around us.
And they can't understand us either, which is why they can't be around us. They can't. I mean, women need to be able to vaguely understand a man, and they can't understand how we cannot be driven by feeling, or what we call feelings, but it's really intuition. And so, yes, I know. I love women, which is maybe a problem. But I have had amazing relationships with amazing women in my life, and I've got at least one that I shouldn't let get away. And these are beautiful, smart women of agency, but they still have some of those urges, but at least you can compromise. You can have the discussion. When women lose agency, they become solipsistic emotion machines. You give them 5 kids, they're fine, right? But if you can't negotiate with them, right, you can't. Because
and it takes a while to give them 5 kids. Will you get to that point in your relationship? What do you do between they're so busy they can't leave you and the beginning of the relationship? You have to get there somehow. So that's always a challenge as well.
I think it's it's different for women and for men. Women have the problem is that their distribution is more in the middle, right? And so there's an awful lot of women who have to settle, and they're invisible to guys like us, right? We don't see them like you just mentioned. And so they have to deal with this particular issue. For guys, if she's pretty and she takes care of you, she's not pretty, she's just reasonably attractive, she takes care of you.
Not ugly.
What?
Not ugly.
She's got to be not ugly and take care of you and, not nag you too much. and you pretty much keep her happy, right? But for a lot of women, they take out the fact that their sexual market value is higher than the man's that they captured, but not high enough to get the man they want. And so they beat on these guys until the guy sees it. Of course, women don't understand. They think they're helping when they nag you. But of course, every time you nag a guy, he sees it as failure. And eventually he will just say, I just feel like I'm a failure, and move on. He won't say it in those terms, but that's what he'll do. And what he really will do is give up. And since once the guy gives up, the woman justifies her opinion, not because he's actually a bad guy who won't take care of her, because she nagged him to death because she has too low market value to get the guy she wants.
And I've seen that happen. And it's if you get the guy before he gives up, you can often teach him how to prevent the decline of the marriage. If you get him after he gives up, there is nothing that anyone can do to make it work.
No. Once he's given up, it's done.
Yeah.
I remember saying to my wife, before the divorce, I'm like, when did you decide that you hated me? I remember saying that to her, and her face just fell apart, and because she didn't realize what she was doing, right? But you see this in who does the research on facial expressions, that if the minute you get the eye roll, it's just time. The minute you get a disgust response out of either partner, it's just time. I had a relationship with a very feminine woman, and not very bright, honestly, but so beautiful and so sweet and so loving and so fun to be around that, your conversation exists at the emotional level, right? The reciprocal care level. There's plenty of guys who have women like that. And they're very happy because we have each other, guys. We can talk to each other. They have girlfriends, but that whole thing is built on a form of reciprocity, right? That is just purely emotional. So as long as there's enough income in the family, to make sure she feels safe, it works out fine. Problem is, if you've got a woman and she wants that and she can't get it because her guy can't provide, she just beats the hell out of him until he leaves, instead of saying, "Well, I guess I shouldn't have done this. I'm going to go through a couple more." So,
yeah, well, and it's unlikely for them to learn. They're probably going to pick the same kind of guy because that's all they can get, and then repeat it. Yeah. No, I think it's good we move on to a couple of really important questions. And one of those is, what's the most important thing or things that a man can do to raise his sexual market value so he can get the best woman that he qualifies for?
The problem for most males is that they were developmentally under-socialized. And so we tend to be very I. We live isolated lives. We work too much, play video games too much, watch sports too much, whatever. We find, and the best thing you can do is develop a network of male friends. That's it. Really, it's totally counterintuitive, but this is actually the answer. I'm like a network of male, a job that you have room to live your life in. In other words, I'm not one of those balanced guys, because I'm the kind of guy who works 100 hours a week, right? But you got to have room to your life, right? The second thing is get a network of male friends who are male. You don't have to be. Most guys want to join a team so they can feel like they're good at something. It doesn't matter. You don't. It doesn't make any difference. Ride bikes or whatever. Just do something regularly. I just fucking hike with guys. That's it. I mean,
and it's important too not to seek out a group where you're always the alpha in the group. You need to seek out a group where you have something to learn, where those men can teach you something. I often ask people to try to understand them. I ask them the question, would you rather be the very best person in the room or the very worst? And I learn a lot about. I personally, I'm always seeking the room where I'm uncomfortable.
Where I'm the worst.
Yeah, where I'm the worst and I'm uncomfortable because they're going to point out that I need to improve. And if I'm not in that room at least some of the time, if you're always at the top, you start going a bit crazy with your own self-importance, and you start.
I don't know what for me is. I just don't want to be. I don't. I don't want to always be in charge.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like everywhere I go, I end up in charge. And I'm like, wait a minute. I build my boards in a company. I build a board so that I'm actually not in charge.
Yeah.
Right. And my job as a CEO is to sell my board. If I can't, and we usually I try to get a unanimous approval, and I won't do it if I don't. And if I can't sell my board, that means I'm wrong. Right. That's how I take it. And then I go out and I work some more, and I'm like, I'm going to try again. And they're like, no. I'm like, God damn it.
I've explained this to men who are trying to build new companies that if you're the father of the project, you need to stop. What are you in charge of? It's just creating the family. You're in charge of choosing who's going to be in that board. You're not in charge of doing anything. And if you're going to join a company where the guy who's the CEO thinks he's also the head programmer and this and that and the other thing, yeah, run away. Go away somewhere else.
Yeah, of course, it's hard because the answer you're not covering there is, will people good enough work for you? So this is the problem I run into. I've run quite a few fairly large consulting companies, and the problem you run into at the CEO level, even at certain Fortune 50 companies I won't name, is that if you're doing anything other than talent development, customer development, you're doing something wrong. I mean, your job is to get rid of stuff, and if you're controlling stuff, is one of two problems. You're not talented enough to hire talent, which is the real issue most of the time, and or you are too controlling to invest in talent. And you run into this all the time, is that the guys who are successful are all they're like us, really. It's just very same. It's like, who the hell can I give this problem to?
I'm not lazy. I will work whatever hours I'm awake, but I'd rather someone else do stuff if I can.
Yes, exactly.
I want to do the things that I'm really, really, really good at, which in my case is helping people to be better versions of themselves.
Yeah.
Everything else, I want to delegate it away, pay someone to do it. If I need research, whatever it is, I pay someone to do it. There's no point in me doing it. I'm not good at those things. I'm good at this thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so you find is that when I go and look at a company I want to acquire, right? And I bought a lot of companies, and they're usually in the mid-range and smaller mid-range. And you go in there, and what you find out is, I see. So the top three guys, right, are doing a lot of work because they don't want to decrease their income to pay for the next layer of people to do it, when that's the only way to get to the next level, right? So they max, or they are the master craftsman and they're not becoming the CEO. And so, right, or they're the master salesman and they're not becoming the CEO. And, I mean, I always say the reason I've been able to be successful is just because smart people work for me. Right, I mean, it's not necessarily because I'm that good. It's just you got to be able to get smart people to work for you, or talented people. And that's what Gates, I learned from him in one meeting, is like the answer to every question is that if you can't solve this problem, I need someone smarter. I mean, that was really that was his answer to everything. And so he would do is he would give you the project, me the project, and somebody else the project, and whoever survived one, and he'd burn the other two. You know what? I don't know, wouldn't really burn them, but he'd just move them on to something else.
Well, and that's when you got a company that big, failure is not an option on a project. It's okay to have the project triplicated and two of them not to work. That's okay. Failure is not.
Yes, and so to me the issue is the I. Are you thinking I? Are you thinking we? You either have a pack and you're learning from being at the bottom, or you're trying to replace yourself so there's bigger pack behind you, right? You've got to do one of those things. I love the idea you brought up because I screw that up. I don't tell people that enough, which is make sure you're not the smartest guy in the room. Because it just means everything's dependent upon you. It also, one of the things I see is that I don't want to be responsible for failure because I'm not omniscient, right? I want better people in the room, so I don't do it. So I want to make sure my finance guy is way better than I am. Not that that's difficult. make sure that the guy who runs the sales department is better than I am. I want to make sure the guy who runs operations is better than I am. I want to make sure the project management team is better than I am.
I had a company in my early 20s. It was growing, got about 50 employees, and I got terribly ill. But because I hadn't yet learned this lesson, too much weight was on me. When I was sick, I couldn't work the hours I needed to work, and the whole thing fell apart. I wasn't there to supervise some contracts being signed, and a couple of wrong signatures, and the whole thing collapses. If I had instead been willing to take less money and put someone else in charge of checking those things, and like you said, if I had learned the lessons I know now back then, if only.
Well, it's because we're not doing a generational transfer of knowledge. We're not doing that because we've given into the lie that it's education rather than mentorship. And it's not. Education is really limited value. Actually, other than sortition, there's no evidence that a college education does any good. So we're paying people a lot of money to sort us into groups so that we're certified. Whereas what you really want is you want to start getting mentorship at 14. And so by the time you're 21, you're where we are today at 40.
Oh, that's another thing that mentioning how men can improve their SMV. They need mentors. I coach people, but that's not even enough. I see them once a week or once every 2 weeks. They need real life mentors that are in their lives in a much more consistent manner. And you need to be willing to offer some value to your mentor. You can't just expect mentoring. It used to be, I think, when you were 7 or something like this, you'd start in a trade, and you'd basically be a slave for 7 years, and at the end you had a trade. So and people, that's terrible. That's child.
No, it's
child
not
slavery.
terrible. It's awesome.
I was a slave in school longer than that, and didn't get anything out of it.
Yes, exactly, exactly. All right, so
the other one was, what can women do as well to raise their sexual market value?
I got in really big trouble for writing about this back in, when was it? It was the mid-2000s.
Let's stir up some trouble.
My board made me take the post offline.
Oh.
If you're not heavy as a woman and you take 1% care, you have sexual market value. I mean, honestly...
Let's say this in a way.
Is what defines market value.
Let's say this in a way that will not get us in trouble, but is very, very plain. Be pretty. Don't be ugly. Don't be a bitch. And then also learn what men want and how to engage with men in a way that makes men feel good about themselves.
They don't think about it that way. They think about it, how do I get a good man?
Yeah.
And what they mean is, how do I get one that does a couple of things? Is entertaining, right? Because women are natural manipulators, and they want to be able to play with you. So to some degree, you're a catnip toy for them. One that has status, right, of some sort in some capacity.
Which is why you have to be in those hierarchies. That's the only way you get status.
It really is. I mean, and it doesn't matter. If you're part of a group, that's what you're trying to learn. When you keep saying one of the things you're trying to teach people clearly is you just need to learn how to be on a team. I mean, I'm just naturally wired that way. I don't care what team it is. I don't care if I'm the worst guy at adult softball, right? It doesn't matter. I will give it my all. I will give it 100%. I'll make a clown of myself. I don't care. I will make it work for my team. And that's what other guys will bind. Then you get a group, you get the guys and their girls, the girls see the other girls. That's a tribe. And that's what women want. They want that somehow. They'll get it from their girlfriends or from your friends, whatever. What you want to do is build it around something masculine. So that is the one thing, this desocialization of the male and dephysicalization. if men can't compete, they don't learn how to be men, because that's what we do, right? I mean, we calculate and we compete, and it's how we care. Women care by playing these little female games with each other of trading, right? But men play this trading game in competition, not in keeping the peace. And so we have two different ways of doing it. So what can women do? I mean, honestly, I learned so much over there. And Veronica, my ex-wife, she said, no, it's keep your weight down, wake up, make up, wear the right clothes, and don't say stupid things.
Well, part of this is men are pretty easy to please.
Yes.
Like, don't be horrible to us, and we'll probably...
Yes.
You can, even as a woman, get treated pretty darn nicely by men if you're just nice to them.
Yes.
Just be nice to us. I mean, that's so rare nowadays. Not the women we are around, but for a lot of men, that women treat them nicely is so rare that even if you're not really good looking, maybe you're in the process of losing weight or getting fit, just don't be horrible. Be nice to men. Respect masculinity.
Well, they have the problem is that in America, men, because we have the sales oriented. I mean, our basic binding thing is commerce, right? That's our culture, is commerce, and so everybody's a salesman, and so women get very tired of no. And so that's where that's coming from. You don't see that in Europe so much because people are more respectful of boundaries, and we are more forward and less respectful of boundaries here. That's actually the problem is we have too many men who are, who make women tired of saying no. The problem is most women women don't know how to say behave. Right. If I've been in a club, and the minute the woman realized I was American, she went like this: "American? You're American? No. And she'd been all over me for 2 hours. Right? There's no. Women don't know how to just say no, and men don't beat up men who don't respect it.
And whereas there was a long time when women didn't have to say no because other men in their tribe would say no on their behalf.
Yes.
This is actually one of the biggest struggles with many of my female clients is teaching them how to set boundaries and how to say no and how to reject unmasculine men. One of my female clients, she says, I get this unbelievable anger every time I come across a feminine man. She says, I just want to disrespect him and tell him what I think of him. And, and she felt that was a completely unnatural thing. I said, no, that's a completely natural reaction. That's a totally natural. My response to that was, that's exactly how I feel too. But you shouldn't have to do it because the man should have other men in his life who do it for him.
Yes.
I guarantee you, every time I meet a weak man, he doesn't have any men in his life who are telling him he needs to be stronger.
Yes.
He's not true. Part of a chain where he's the weak link. He's all by himself and there's no one there to tell him. Or he's only around women.
Yes.
That's the other problem. And men, you got to be part of a male. In fact, you got to be part of several male hierarchies. This is where my coaching started. Was the very first advice I was giving to people was get in a hierarchy, and overlapping hierarchies. So that you're at the bottom of some, you're in the middle of some, and you're at the top of others. So you learn leadership as well. And for women, I mean, I'll have women that are very high sexual market value women, but don't know how to negotiate the sexual marketplace. So that's more what they're getting help with. And they'll get 1,000 responses on OkCupid. They put their post up 24 hours later, they got 1,000 responses. And men, they'll put their post up and a month later, there's 0 responses.
Right.
And it's just because, the thing women have to do is just kind of be there and not be horrible. And
but that's the thing. What I, of course, when I was first getting divorced and started dating again, there's a lot of professional women who want a guy who's up here or better, right? And they can't find him. And I'm like, well, the problem is you're not female. And, the woman that got away from me, in other words, I chose to go with a more feminine woman than this one, who's a really I mean, she's a rock star in this world, in the world of women. She's a rock star. Not in. I mean, it's in academia, and the problem is they're not feminine. And I'm like, you work so hard to make sure men don't hit on you, is that you've forgotten how to be female. And I'm sorry. I mean, it's like nothing's happening on my side here. I mean, it should be, but you don't even know how to walk anymore. And so, I mean, we're all animals underneath, and you want to marry up, but I mean, you got to be female for a guy. That's why for guys, it's really easy. I mean, we can take a woman 15 years younger who's, just pretty and nice.
Well, and men who are high SMV will go for a woman who's younger than them.
Yeah, well, I mean Veronica's turning 30. I mean,
Good job. Good job.
So I mean, and women, and when they get into their mid 30s, they start losing the crazy. I mean, women in early, 33, 34 through 45. I mean, wow, they're amazing human beings to be around once they've lost the crazy.
And if they take care of themselves, in fact, that's usually how you can tell they lost the crazy. Is the ones that take better care of themselves
have lost the crazy.
Are usually the one. Yeah, they're the ones that are more stable. There is a lot we can judge about people by looking at them and how they present themselves, because they're warning you off. If they look like they're trying to be repulsive, they're warning you off that there's something wrong.
Yep. I get the other problem is that because I have a touch of, everybody overstates it too much, but I just have a touch of Aspie. I'm right on that borderline, And so the problem is that we're extremely friendly by nature. Right? And so women always think I'm hitting on them. No, I'm just not an asshole. I'm just friendly. It's just my default demeanor. And so I have the other problem. I get rejected. I'm like, wait a minute, what's this? No, I'm not even in. You wouldn't even show up on my radar.
I'm preemptively rejecting you. But what? What? Who are you?
What's that signal for? No, I'm just being nice. So you get that, but so there's all sorts of stuff. But I think the real problem, of course, is we in America, that's the issue, is that we have over commercialized society. So we tried to build the ultimate commercial society we have, and we're paying the cost of it. Everybody looks at this at the political level and whatever, but they're not bringing it down to the relationship level, which is I'm not respecting boundaries. Yep. And if we go back to respecting boundaries, then we don't have the women trying to reject everybody. If we go back to men actually being fit and joining a hierarchy, or I would call it a team, but joining a team so that we're a team player on things, so we stay masculine in mind and fit. Doesn't hurt to read a book. But most of what I see in men is their real problem is very simple. They're under socialized with men. Mm-hmm. That's it, and women just hate that shit.
Well, even all of the auxiliary problems that come out of that can be fixed by improved socialization with masculine men. And what it starts with, there's so many men that are essentially not exposed to a masculine man until they graduate from high school and get their first job.
That's right. Right.
They just don't meet.
And then they're shocked.
And I don't know if you remember from going to school. It was probably better when you were in school. Probably better, a little better when I was in. There were some masculine male teachers, but it was pretty rare. And my parents would advocate. I did leave school eventually to finish on my own, but they would advocate for me to be in the class with the male teacher, which I really appreciated. They were like, "Oh, there's a male teacher for that grade. Get my son in there. I want my son in there." It
was by design. It starts in 63, 64. So for I graduated in high school in 77, so I still had the pre and post-war guys as teachers, and so they were men. But the difference was also you could have a fight in the schoolyard and come home and get a black eye, and it was just your problem.
Yeah,
and so you could be men. Right? It wasn't always this girly thing where the women have taken over the whole thing and they're trying to keep it infantile order. I went to Xavier, which is an all-boys Catholic high school, and for that reason I went to an all-male dorm in college, and then I moved from an all-male dorm to a single with my girlfriend. because forget it. I mean, what I learned is that men are way better when we're together and we can form tribes and we can reinforce each other and build each other. When that's not happening, you don't realize how society is disassembling you and us all the time because they're afraid, right? But we need the competition. We need the drive. I mean, the hell we used to cause, which today what you'd get arrested for, but was just mischief. Like, we stole stuff from McDonald's and hang it from the flagpole. You know what I mean? It's not crime. It's mischief. It's practice, right?
Well,
right?
it's what Spartan youth had to do in order to be accepted as men in their society.
Yes.
They'd have to cause a lot of it was mischief.
Yeah, it's just mischief. And so, they used to have to steal, right? I mean, steal from but the real point is, are you man? Will you be a man when we have to be? Well, mischief is a great replacement, just like sports are a great replacement. Mischief is a great replacement. My view has always been that men need to go into one of the services and they need to be taught the Marine model, which is the old-fashioned model of warrior, not soldier. They need to be taught the warrior model just so they're not pussies anymore. I mean, and I'm saying this. You're talking to the ultimate nerd in your high school, right? The kid with like walks around, that's me, right? I mean, but I still played wrestling and tennis and and raced mini bikes and motorcycles. So you still got to do some of that guy stuff because otherwise it's just useless.
Well, and young men who are raised without any man around, if you don't have a father, you need to go out. You need to be careful, but you got to find masculine influences. The easiest one you can do is watch videos with masculine men. YouTube has a whole manosphere with men. Start being careful. Pick out the right men to imitate, and start from there. And when you can, be with other men, imitate masculine behaviors. A lot of it is faking it till you make it. As you fake it, you start figuring out why do men behave a certain way. You start to figure it out. You imitate. It's how children learn. They imitate at first, and over time they start to figure out.
I don't like fake it. I don't like that.
Okay.
You're just trying, right? I mean,
yeah.
And other men, we love it when that happens. I mean, on my stuff, the way I teach is king of the hill. Right? I set myself up as king. It's completely contrived, right? I make these completely outrageous statements. I set up on the king of the hill, and that's just so that the men will feel safe competing. And I just want the guys to, and all guys are like that, right? As long as you're not and you're not causing the deer to run away so we don't get a kill.
Destroying the game. If you're destroying the game or not playing by the rules is one thing. As long as you're playing by the rules, the competition can be fierce. Yeah,
and it's fun. We love that shit, and it doesn't even matter what it's for. I mean, just after work sports or weekend sports. I have a friend. He's played hockey. He's a bigger guy than me, but he plays hockey, and they fucking lose. He's been playing it for 15 years. They lose all the time. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
The losing is a major bonding experience for the men.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Anytime you go through an experience.
Yeah, so that's the trick. I think that the one thing I've been working on lately, because I've noticed that the people that stay with my work and the people that go to other sort of branches, the ones that go are single, lonely men. And they're looking for an intensity of feeling because they want to win something, right? And I'm like, well, you're looking in the wrong place. Go get a job where you have to compete with real men. Find it. And this is what, again, the reason I don't like the feminization of the workplace is you can't get that socialization and that competition. Like, if you meet some of the women I've had on sales calls, they'll eat you for, the women I hire for sales, they'll eat you for lunch. I mean, they'll take advantage of every masculine weakness you have. I love them, right? But, taking 5 or 12 guys out on a sales call for a $15 million deal, and you've rehearsed it, it's just like playing football, except it's argumentative, right? You're prepared, you've planned your plays, you know your jobs and your roles, the whole thing, and you make it. and so and I love that shit. I live for it. I mean, it's the reason I stay in business rather than writing full time. I mean, this is no. You need the charge. And the guys who never learn how to do it, they're mommy's boys forever. They're useless. You wonder why women don't want you is because you can't fight.
Yeah, and it's not just physical. You can't even fight in any sphere. You can't. Yep. You can't fight for what you want. And the thing is young men who are like this, you can fix it. It's fixable.
Yep.
But they can fix it. I can't. We can't fix them.
It's fixable. It's fixable. Yeah. But the problem is the investment. I find that people looking to me are different from people looking to you because I don't actually advertise what I do. I'm just sort of doing my work and they're playing the game with me. But what I find is that guys, there's just only so much you can do without getting paid for it. And if I was going to get paid for it, I still wouldn't do it.
I have to reject about a third of the people that come to me for coaching because there's within a reasonable time frame, there's nothing I can do, even if they're paying me, and because you just can't take people's money for nothing.
Yeah. I have this problem with corporate America, right? Is that you're looking at somebody's business and you're listening. I think I can probably use these guys as an example. No, I can't. This a big company, many billions of dollars, and I'm talking to the management team, and I realize you guys are so fucked up. I'm not willing. It's $5 million, but I don't want your money. I'm sorry, I don't care. I'm not willing to spend the next year of my life on you when it's
like a short-term marriage. You got to decide whether you can put up with them or not.
It's just a bad use of my time, you know. The other thing is I had the other one. I tell the story all the time. Is I come back. The head of every major advertising agency. Everyone. I mean, it's a small family of the big triangle, right? And then there's basically 25. I'm like 29, right? And so every guy has told the Microsoft management what they need to do. But we all know, right? Everybody knows. They won't change it, right? Because it's a compensation problem, right? Everybody at Microsoft's incentivized to do what's the worst possible interest of the company. And so I remember come back after this, and I'm trying to help them with I'm doing my job, right? Somebody said, please help me with this. It's the future of the company. And I'm like, we're going to fail, but I'll give it. And at some point I'm like, after 6 months they have this room there it's a hockey stick room, right? You're supposed to be honest in there. Well, you just lie more sophisticated. They lie to each other with greater degrees of sophistication. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I come home and I'm like ready to cry, with frustration. And I just feel it in me because it's a waste of life to deal with that much frustration and anxiety and hard work with people who, the incentives are rigged to produce the wrong outcome for that company. And who can change that? Well, the board. Well, the board's also got the same malincentive. So,
only the stockholders in the end can change it. But
the stockholders are powerless. They probably should be powerless. But I'm talking to one of the other a very sophisticated guy in the marketing, one of the best guys out there. I mean, I'm the marketing proletarian compared to this guy, right? And he's like, Curt, we've all tried, right? You, me, and he goes to the list. It doesn't do any good. We take their money, because somebody's going to take their money if we don't, but it doesn't do any good. Every time they open their mouths, their reputation goes down.
Yeah. And what the problem is doing business with people like that. That rubs off on you too, because you're involved then each time there's a failure, and somehow you're involved in that. And so it's very tricky to take on projects with companies that are not healthy, because you have the stink can rub off on you if you're not careful.
I actually had a moral, I went into the Apple store when I was, and this is when the Mac came out, and I said, I want an Apple, and I want a compiler, and I want the manuals. And because I'm gonna put energy into this thing, and they're like, "Oh, you can't do that. Apple writes their own software." I'm like, what? What about this stuff do you guys not understand? So I went out and I bought an IBM PC, Microsoft DOS, and the compilers, and I wrote software for that. And I was just a kid, right? And so the same problem for Microsoft is that I viewed Gates as democratized. I viewed Gates as somebody who had made it possible for me to be wealthy. And so I actually viewed it as a sort of personal mission to try to help things work along. So the way we took it is there's the stuff that's visible that is going to crash, and there's the stuff where we can help people get their job done. And so we focused on helping people get their job done because those upper agencies just rotated. And I just kept business for 20 years.
Very good.
Because there's no... Go ahead.
We're running low on time, so I want to just ask one quick last question, and let's see if we'll answer this in the next 2 or 3 minutes. What role does violence play in the sexual marketplace, and how should we be changing that?
Well, I thought I answered that, but I probably didn't answer it clearly.
Oh, you answered that. I just want to do a summarization of that, the actual role of violence itself. We talked about it with divorce, how men are subjected to the violence of the state, forcing them to support creating malincentives. Taxpayers are forced to create a malincentive through taxation that's being used for bad purposes. But I think even beyond that, that we mentioned men committing suicide. We didn't mention the extreme amount of violence children are subjected to in single parent households. This type of stuff is often ignored when people are thinking about the sexual marketplace, the violence that is present.
We use all politics is proxy for violence, right? You can use law, tort law, which is what I call natural law, to suppress parasitism. In other words, you can use violence or the threat of violence to eliminate harms. But the state has taken it upon itself to use violence to create what they consider goods. It turns out those goods are not good. Nearly everything the state has done to interfere with the various markets has turned out to be produce the opposite of any intended effect, because in effect markets don't subsidize malincentives as long as the law is around, but politics has turned out to be the generation of malincentives by the production of subsidies for behavior that's cumulatively destructive. And so we are, as men, subject. This is why I argue with Steven Pinker's position, is he says violence has gone down. No, it's just indirect violence that takes most of our wealth, our ability to retire in comfort, our families, our social comforts, our happiness, and converts it into taxation to empower the state and to commit genocide against us. The state doesn't grasp the fact that we have the only honest working middle class in the world. And that high trust middle class is what makes us Europeans. But that's why America is so profitable, is that people actually in the middle class are trustworthy. Except what the state is organized to do is destroy the high trust middle class that makes the state and these subsidies possible. So I see the world not as reduction in violence. I see the world reduced to, I see a reduction in the the pursuit of physical crime, because physical crime is so less rewarding than organized crime. In other words, the means of extraction by indirectly violent means. So the degree to which you and I are subject to violence is far outweighs any degree we were subject to violence before, and moreover, we have no ability to retaliate unless we overthrow the whole system. So my argument is that, yes, we are subject to pervasive violence to the point at which it's no longer in our interest to surrender our wealth of violence to the state to use on our behalf. Instead, we have to withdraw our capital, our violence, and return it to ourselves and make use of the violence to restore reciprocity. Because, it's one thing to say we need to have reciprocity. I'll trade with you. It's another to say we have to have proportionality. In other words, we have to insure one another. It's another thing to exterminate other people through the organized use of violence to perpetuate extraction that causes culture-side genocide and civilization-side. I'm not willing to put up with it anymore. That's why I said I'm absolutely dedicated to organizing that 1% of men, so that we restore the reciprocity instead of being subject to predation.
And men who are in tune with other men, other masculine men, all are sensing this, that we're at a point now where a lot of men their calculation in their head is changing from the cost of physical violence outweighs the cost of the current situation. It's going to switch, and now it's cheaper to do something. Cheaper to
do something, and everybody's come. I have the mature men who think practically like we do, and you have the sentimental men that are looking for a substitute religion, which I just view it as they're just looking for another form of sci-fi escapism. Go read go watch Game of Thrones, or read Lord of the Rings, because you're just doing moral. You're doing pretend moral literature. Here's the deal: is that we're either going to get together and make the impossible, to make the status quo unsustainable, or we're going to be exterminated. And frankly, I'm not willing to let me and mine be exterminated. I owe a debt to my ancestors, and I owe an obligation to those that come before us. And I think that it only takes a small number of us to make this happen. And I think men are getting there. They're getting there because really it's just gotten intolerable.
Well, back in the day when men were men, it took very few men to actually make the American Revolution work. And that was, like I said, it's a time when men were really masculine and tough and hard and had a lot less fear of death than men tend to have today. And in this modern world full of soy boys, it doesn't take a lot of actual men to change things.
No, I've had this argument before. I mean, anybody who has looked at this says, it's actually a 10,000 man problem, right? I'm saying, yeah, but with 1 million men, it's a really easy problem.
10,000 men can make it unsustainable. 1 million men can make the new system sustainable.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And so it's just a matter of, that's why I say I know what my job is. Moral justification. Well, I don't have to make that case anymore because everybody's already caught up. The second thing is a set of demands, right? You need to know what you're going to replace the chaos with. Not because you need the incentive, but people need disincentive to disagree with you. And that incentive needs to be something innovative that actually solves people's problems. The third thing you need is a means of transition. In other words, you need to be able to cause enough disruption to the status quo. Well, once you realize this is the most fragile empire in history at this point, mostly for very simple reasons, that you just have to sort of stop putting your finger in the dike. It's not so much if we got to do something. We just got to prevent fingers from going in the dike, and the very sheer momentum of it will fall down. I mean, so it's, to me, I've just been on my plan since, I've started in 92, got aggressive about it in 2006, knew what I was going to do by 2009, and I'm just doing my job, which is trying to put all that together.
Well, thank you very much, Curt Doolittle. And where can we find out more information about what you're writing? Where can we follow you at?
I sort of teach class on Facebook. You can find me there. I'm on Patreon like everybody else, but it's not. I don't really use it very much. And my website is propertarianism.com. And you got to remember, propertarianism, what I do, it's big or bigger than Marxism. It is not a small thing. It's not like libertarianism where you're going to go learn go study the non-aggression principle and be finished, or Marxism and you're going to see the class hierarchy and run away and think you're knowledgeable. I mean, it's basically the creation of social science, and so or the definition of social science. So it's a big program, but you'll get it. It's there if you want to learn.
And everyone's going to get it to a different level. It's not necessary to always master right off the bat. You start off reading.
You'll get the history.
If you don't understand it, read it. Keep reading it. At a certain point, it starts to click. And the more experience you have in actual life, the faster that click happens. The faster you come to the understanding of it. Well, thank you very much, Curt. It's been wonderful having you with me
love
today.
your work. Thank you, man.
Thanks, and I love what you're doing as well, Curt. Goodbye. I urge you to subscribe to this channel and join us on smv4k.com. The real magic happens when you get one-on-one personal coaching. You can find the link to receive coaching on smv4k.com. Please share this message on your social media. Support us using the links below.